A New Model of the Universe by Pyotr Demyanovich Ouspensky. Chapter 1. Esotericism and Modern Thought. The concept of a body of knowledge that transcends conventional human understanding, remaining inaccessible to the general populace yet existing in some obscure quarter and possessed by select individuals, has permeated the entire history of human thought since the most remote epochs. Furthermore, according to certain historical records and monuments of the past, a form of knowledge utterly distinct from our own constituted the essence and substance of human cognition during eras when, by alternative estimations, mankind diverged scarcely at all from the animal kingdom. Consequently, this hidden wisdom is occasionally termed ancient knowledge. Yet, needless to say, such a designation offers no genuine explanation. It must, nevertheless, be observed that all religions, mythologies, creeds, and heroic folklore across all nations and regions are predicated upon the acknowledgement that there existed, at some juncture and in some locus, a knowledge vastly superior to any that we currently possess or are capable of acquiring. Indeed, to a substantial degree, the substance of all religious systems and mythologies consists of symbolic representations that endeavor to convey the notion of this esoteric knowledge. Conversely, nothing illustrates the limitations of human intellect and imagination so vividly as the prevailing conceptions regarding the actual substance of this hidden knowledge. While the terminology, the concept, the hypothesis, and the expectation endure, there exist no definite, concrete forms of perception associated with this notion. Furthermore, the core idea must frequently be disinterred with immense difficulty from beneath mountains of falsehoods, both deliberate and inadvertent, as well as from deception, self-delusion, and naive attempts to depict, through familiar forms derived from mundane existence, that which by its very nature bears no resemblance to them. The task of uncovering traces of ancient or hidden knowledge, or even subtle intimations of its existence, closely resembles the endeavors of archaeologists seeking vestiges of a long-forgotten civilization, only to discover them entombed beneath successive strata of necropolises left by subsequent populations who inhabited the same region, separated perhaps by millennia and entirely oblivious to their predecessors. Yet, whenever an investigator encounters attempts to express, in one manner or another, the substance of this hidden knowledge, he invariably observes the same phenomenon, namely, the striking paucity of human imagination when confronted with such a concept. Mankind, when confronted with the prospect of hidden knowledge, resembles the characters of folklore who are promised by some deity, fairy, or sorcerer that their every desire will be granted, provided they specify precisely what they wish to receive. As a rule, however, the protagonists of these fables are at a loss as to what they should request. On occasion, the magical benefactor offers to fulfill up to 3 wishes, yet even this concession proves futile. Throughout the folklore of all eras and civilizations, individuals become hopelessly bewildered when presented with the question of their desires and aspirations. They prove utterly incapable of defining and articulating their wishes. Either at that critical juncture they recall only some trivial, inconsequential desire, or they voice contradictory wishes that nullify one another. Alternatively, as in the fairy tale of the fisherman and the fish, they fail to remain within the boundaries of the plausible and, continuously demanding more, ultimately attempt to subjugate higher cosmic forces, oblivious to the limitations of their own faculties and capacities. Consequently, they suffer a repeated downfall, forfeiting anew all they had acquired, owing to their own inability to comprehend clearly what they desire. In a humorous vein, this notion of the difficulty of formulating desires, and the rarity of human success in doing so, is illustrated in an Indian fable. A beggar, blind from birth, who lived in celibacy and subsisted on the charity of his neighbors, had for a long period incessantly besieged a certain deity with his supplications. The deity was ultimately moved by this unremitting devotion. However, apprehending that his petitioner might not easily be appeased, he took the precaution of binding him by an oath to request no more than a single boon. This constraint perplexed the beggar for a considerable time, but his professional ingenuity eventually came to his aid. "I hasten to obey the behest, generous Lord," quoth he, "and this solitary boon is all I ask at thy hands, namely, that I should live to see the grandchild of my grandchild playing in a 7-storied palace and helped by a train of attendants to his meal of milk and rice, out of a golden cup." And he concluded by expressing the hope that he had not exceeded the limits of the single wish granted to him. The deity perceived that he had been outwitted, for although singular in form, the requested boon encompassed the manifold blessings of health, wealth, longevity, restoration of sight, matrimony, and progeny. Out of sheer admiration for his devotee's astuteness and consummate tact, if not merely to fulfill his pledged word, the deity felt compelled to grant him all that he had requested. In the legend of Solomon, we find an elucidation of these parables, an explanation of what mankind might receive, provided they possess the wisdom to know what to desire. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give thee." And Solomon said, "I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or how to come in, and thy servant is in the midst of thy people. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad." And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, "Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, and I will lengthen thy days." The concept of hidden knowledge, along with the prospect of discovering it after a protracted and arduous quest, constitutes the essence of the legend of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail, the chalice from which Christ drank at the Last Supper and wherein Joseph of Arimathea collected his blood, was, according to medieval legend, transported to England. To those who beheld it, the Grail bestowed immortality and perpetual youth. However, it could be guarded only by individuals of absolute purity of heart. Should any approach who was deficient in purity, the Grail vanished. Hence arose the legend of the quest for the Holy Grail by chaste and virtuous knights. Only 3 of King Arthur's knights succeeded in beholding the Grail. Numerous tales and myths, such as those of the Golden Fleece, the Firebird, Aladdin's lamp, and various narratives concerning secret wealth and treasures guarded by dragons or other monstrous entities, serve to depict the relationship of mankind to this hidden knowledge. The philosopher's stone of the alchemists likewise symbolized this esoteric wisdom. On this point, all existential philosophies may be divided into 2 distinct categories. There exist worldviews founded entirely upon the premise that we inhabit a dwelling containing some secret, some buried treasure, or some hidden repository of precious assets, which someone at some juncture may discover, and which, on occasion, has indeed been found. Consequently, from this perspective, the entire purpose and meaning of existence lie in the pursuit of this treasure, for without it, all else is devoid of value. Conversely, there are alternative theories and systems that exclude any concept of a hidden treasure, and for which everything is either uniformly visible and transparent, or uniformly invisible and obscure. If, in our contemporary era, theories of the latter category, namely those that deny the possibility of hidden knowledge, have become predominant, we must remember that they achieved this status only recently and solely within a small, albeit highly clamorous, segment of humanity. The vast majority of mankind continues to believe in fairy tales, holding the conviction that there are moments when such fables transition into reality. Yet, it is humanity's misfortune that at those precise junctures when something novel and unfamiliar becomes attainable, individuals remain ignorant of their own desires. Consequently, the opportunity that so abruptly manifested itself vanishes with equal suddenness. Man is conscious of being encircled by the barrier of the unknown, while simultaneously believing that he can penetrate this partition and that others have already succeeded in doing so. Yet, he remains incapable of conceptualizing, or conceptualizes only in the vaguest manner what might lie beyond it. He comprehends neither what he wishes to discover there, nor what the possession of such knowledge truly entails. It does not even occur to him that an individual may stand in various relations to the unknown. The unknown, by definition, is unrevealed. Nevertheless, the unknown may assume diverse forms, precisely as observed in everyday existence. A person may lack precise knowledge of a specific subject, yet they may contemplate it, formulating judgments and hypotheses, and conjecturing or anticipating its nature with such accuracy that their actions and expectations regarding this specific uncertainty prove virtually correct. In precisely the same manner, regarding the great unknown, an individual may maintain disparate relationships with it. He may formulate more or less accurate hypotheses concerning it, make no assumptions whatsoever, or even entirely relegate the very existence of the unknown to oblivion. In these latter instances, wherein he posits no hypotheses or forgets the existence of the unknown, even that which was possible under other circumstances, namely the fortuitous alignment of speculation with the unrevealed reality, becomes utterly impossible. In this human incapacity to envision what lies beyond the boundary of the known and the possible lies man's principal tragedy. Herein, as previously stated, lies the reason why so much remains concealed from him, and why there persist so many inquiries to which he can never obtain an answer. Throughout the history of human intellect, numerous attempts have been made to delineate the boundaries of attainable knowledge. Yet, there exist no compelling endeavors to conceptualize what the expansion of these limits would signify, or whither it would inevitably lead. Such an assertion may appear to be a deliberate paradox. Individuals clamor so vociferously and so frequently regarding the boundless potential of knowledge and the immense horizons unfolding before scientific inquiry. In reality, however, all these supposedly limitless possibilities are constrained by the five senses: vision, audition, olfaction, tactile perception, and gustation, augmented only by the faculties of reason and comparison, boundaries that humanity can never transcend. We fail to account adequately for this circumstance, or indeed overlook it entirely, which explains our perplexity when attempting to define and distinguish among ordinary, possible, and esoteric knowledge. Throughout the mythologies and folklore of all eras, we encounter the concepts of magic, witchcraft, and sorcery, which, as we approach the modern epoch, manifest as spiritualism, occultism, and kindred phenomena. Yet, Even those who profess belief in these terms possess but a highly imperfect comprehension of their true significance, and of the manner in which the knowledge of a magus or an occultist diverges from that of an ordinary individual. Consequently, all endeavors to formulate a coherent theory of magical knowledge culminate in failure. The outcome is invariably something indefinite and, though untenable, fails to be truly fantastical, because the magician is typically portrayed as an ordinary human being merely endowed with certain hypertrophied faculties in a single domain. Furthermore, the mere exaggeration of attributes along well-established paths cannot engender anything genuinely fantastical. Even if miraculous knowledge represents a method of approaching the unknown, humanity remains ignorant of how to approach the miraculous itself. In this endeavor, they are severely impeded by the intrusion of pseudo-occult literature, which frequently endeavors to dissolve the aforementioned distinctions and demonstrate the fundamental unity of scientific and esoteric knowledge. Thus, within such literature, one frequently encounters the assertion that magic or magical knowledge is merely knowledge that has anticipated its era. For example, it is posited that certain medieval monastics may have possessed some rudimentary understanding of electricity, an acquisition which, in their epoch, constituted magic, but which has ceased to be such for us. By extension, that which appears magical to our contemporaries would cease to be regarded as such by future generations. Such an assertion is entirely arbitrary. By dismantling these vital distinctions, it prevents us from identifying and establishing a correct orientation toward the facts. Magical or occult knowledge is that which is predicated upon perceptions transcending our five senses and upon a cognitive capacity exceeding ordinary thought, yet translated, insofar as it is feasible, into the vernacular of conventional logic. When discussing ordinary knowledge, it is necessary to reiterate that although its content is not static, changing and expanding continuously, it nevertheless develops along definite and strictly predetermined trajectories. All scientific methodologies, apparatuses, instruments, and appliances represent nothing more than the refinement and extension of our five physical senses, while mathematics and all conceivable calculations are merely the amplification of our ordinary capacity for comparison, reasoning, and deduction. Yet, simultaneously, certain mathematical formulations transcend the domain of ordinary knowledge so thoroughly as to sever all connection with it. Mathematics discerns such relationships of magnitudes, or relationships among relationships, as possess no equivalence within the observable physical universe. We remain, however, incapable of utilizing these mathematical achievements, because we are bound in all our observations and rationalizations by the five senses and the tenets of logic. In every historical epoch, human knowledge, that is to say, ordinary, established, and accepted knowledge, encompassed a specific cycle of observations and the deductions derived therefrom. With the passage of time, this cycle expanded. Yet, if one may so express it, it remained invariably upon the same plane, never ascending above it. Believing in the possibility and existence of esoteric knowledge, humanity has consistently attributed novel properties to it, viewing it as ascending above the level of ordinary comprehension and extending beyond the limitations of the five senses. This is the true essence of esoteric knowledge, of magic, and of miraculous cognition. Should we divest esoteric knowledge of the premise that it transcends the five senses, it divests itself of all significance and utility. If, taking all this into consideration, we survey the history of human thought in its relation to the miraculous, we may discover material with which to ascertain the potential content of the unknown. This ought to be feasible because, Notwithstanding the poverty of its imagination and the divergent nature of its endeavors, humanity has occasionally conjectured correctly. Such a synthesis of human aspirations to penetrate the realm of the incomprehensible and the mysterious is particularly compelling at present, when the psychological study of mankind has acknowledged the validity of states of consciousness formerly deemed pathological, recognizing their cognitive value, namely, the fact that within these states of consciousness, an individual can acquire knowledge inaccessible in ordinary states. Yet, this line of inquiry has reached an impasse and progressed no further. It had been recognized that, whilst remaining within scientific parameters, it is impossible to regard the ordinary state of consciousness, in which we are capable of logical reasoning, as the sole possibility or the most lucid. On the contrary, it had been established that in other states of consciousness, which are rare and have been but minimally studied, we are capable of apprehending and understanding that which remains incomprehensible in our ordinary state. This, in turn, served to establish that the ordinary state of consciousness is merely a particular instance of consciousness, and that our conventional conception of the universe is but a specific instance of world conception. Furthermore, the investigation of these unusual, rare, and exceptional human states has established a distinct unity, a certain connectedness and consecutiveness, and an entirely illogical logicality within the content of these so-called mystical states of consciousness. At this juncture, however, the inquiry into mystical states of consciousness has reached a standstill, advancing no further. Defining a mystical state of consciousness utilizing conventional psychological terminology presents considerable difficulty. Judging by external indications, such a state shares many characteristics with somnambulistic and psychopathological conditions. The establishment of the cognitive value of mystical states of consciousness is by no means a novel development. This fact is new only to scientific inquiry. Indeed, the reality and validity of mystical states of consciousness have been, and continue to be, acknowledged by every religion without exception, both extant and historical. According to the definition posited by Orthodox theologians, mystical states of consciousness cannot reveal or introduce new dogmas. Rather, they elucidate and explain the substance of dogmas already received through revelation. From this, it is evident that mystical states of consciousness do not oppose fundamental revelation but are, as it were, regarded as phenomena of an identical nature, albeit of lesser potency. They may clarify dogmas imparted by revelation, but they remain incapable of introducing new ones. Regrettably, theological interpretations invariably remain confined within the boundaries of the dogmas and canonical regulations of a specific religion, unable by their very nature to transcend these limitations. Regarding science, as previously noted, it has exhibited sparse interest in mysticism, relegating it to the domain of pathology, or, at best, to the realm of the imagination. The term mysticism is employed in highly diverse senses, denoting, for instance, a specific type of theory or doctrine. According to a common dictionary definition, the term mysticism encompasses all those doctrines and beliefs concerning life beyond the grave, the soul, spirits, and the latent forces within man. Divinity, which does not enter into conventional and recognized religious teachings, is also included. However, the utilization of the term in this manner is entirely erroneous, as it obscures its fundamental meaning. Consequently, within this volume, the word mysticism shall henceforth be employed solely in its psychological sense, that is, to denote exceptional states of consciousness, alongside the ideas and world conceptions directly arising from them. Should it be mentioned in any other sense, such as in reference to specific theories, this distinction will be explicitly indicated. An examination of the extant knowledge regarding mysticism and mystical states of consciousness is of profound interest in relation to the concept of hidden knowledge. If we adopt neither the religious nor the scientific viewpoint, but instead endeavor to compare descriptions of the mystical experiences of individuals from entirely disparate races, historical epochs, and religions, we discover a striking resemblance among these accounts, a correspondence that can by no means be attributed to a similarity of preparation or a resemblance in modes of thought and feeling. Within mystical states, vastly different individuals in entirely diverse circumstances apprehend one and the same reality. And, what is even more remarkable, within these states, religious distinctions dissolve. The experiences themselves are absolutely identical. Any variation resides solely in the language and the manner of description. Throughout the mysticism of diverse nations and peoples, the identical imagery and discoveries are invariably reiterated. Indeed, there exists sufficient material of this nature upon which to construct a new, synthetic religion. Yet, religions are not fashioned by reason. Mystical experiences remain intelligible only to those within mystical states. All that may be derived from an intellectual study of mystical states is merely an approximation, a tentative suggestion of a certain comprehension. Mysticism is entirely emotional, comprised of subtle, incommunicable sensations that are far less amenable to verbal articulation and logical definition than are such phenomena as sound, color, and line. In relation to the concept of hidden knowledge, mysticism may be regarded as a breakthrough of this hidden knowledge into our ordinary consciousness. This does not imply, however, that all mystics invariably recognize the existence of hidden knowledge or the possibility of acquiring it through study and effort. For many mystics, their experiences constitute an act of grace, a divine gift, and from their perspective, no amount of knowledge can ever guide humanity to this grace or facilitate its acquisition. Thus, from one perspective, mysticism could not exist devoid of hidden knowledge, nor could the concept of hidden knowledge be apprehended without mysticism. From another perspective, the notion of a hidden knowledge possessed by specific individuals and attainable through intellectual means is superfluous to mysticism, for the entirety of knowledge is contained within the human soul, and mysticism is the path to this knowledge and the way to God. In view of this dual attitude of mysticism toward hidden knowledge, it is necessary to distinguish clearly between these two concepts. Hidden knowledge is a concept that does not align with any other. If the existence of hidden knowledge is admitted, it is assumed to belong to certain individuals, yet to individuals unknown to us, comprising an inner circle of humanity. According to this hypothesis, humanity is conceptualized as two concentric circles. The entirety of humanity known to us, and to which we belong, constitutes the outer circle. The whole of human history within our knowledge is the history of this outer circle. Yet within this circle lies another, of which the inhabitants of the outer circle remain entirely ignorant, and the existence of which they only occasionally and dimly suspect, notwithstanding that the life of the outer circle, in its most significant manifestations and particularly in its evolution, is actually guided by this inner circle. This inner or esoteric circle constitutes, as it were, a life within life, a mystery, a secret at the heart of human existence. Outer or exoteric humanity to which we belong resembles the leaves of a tree that are renewed annually. Despite this, they perceive themselves as the center of life, failing to comprehend that the tree possesses a trunk and roots, and that, In addition to leaves, it bears both flowers and fruit. The esoteric circle is, as it were, humanity within humanity, serving as the intellect, or rather the immortal soul of mankind, wherein all the attainments, results, and achievements of every culture and civilization are preserved. One may examine this question from another perspective and attempt to discern within man himself an analogy to the relationship between the esoteric and exoteric circles of humanity. Such an analogy indeed exists in man, residing in the relationship of the brain to the remainder of the human organism. If we consider the human organism and examine the relationship of the higher or more noble tissues, namely the nervous and cerebral matter, to the other tissues of the body, such as muscular tissue, connective tissue, and the cells of the skin, we find an almost perfect analogy to the relationship between the inner and outer circles. Among the most mysterious phenomena in the life of the human organism is the life history of its cerebral cells. It is with reasonable certainty established by science, and may be accepted as fact, that cerebral cells do not replicate in the manner of other somatic tissues. According to one hypothesis, all cerebral cells are present from a very early age. According to another, they increase in number until the organism reaches approximately 12 years of age. Yet how they develop, and from what origins, remains entirely unknown. Reasoning logically, science ought to have recognized cerebral cells as virtually immortal in comparison with other cellular structures. This is virtually all that can be asserted regarding cerebral cells, if we confine ourselves to recognized scientific territory. Yet, that which is currently accepted is far from sufficient for a comprehensive understanding of the nature of cerebral cellular life. An excessive number of facts must be disregarded before one can assent to the hypothesis of a permanent reserve of cerebral cells that undergoes not but progressive diminution. This theory of an immutable reserve stands in stark contradiction to the alternative postulate, whereby cerebral cells perish or are consumed in vast numbers during every cognitive process, particularly during intense intellectual exertion. Were this indeed the case, their numbers, however vast, would have been rapidly depleted. Bearing this in mind, one is compelled to admit that the life cycle of cerebral cells remains unexplained and profoundly mysterious. Indeed, although unrecognized by orthodox science, the lifespan of individual cells is exceedingly brief, and the replacement of senescent cells by new ones within a healthy organism proceeds incessantly, a process that may even be accelerated under certain conditions. It lies beyond the scope of the present volume to demonstrate how this proposition may be verified. Given contemporary scientific methodology, the direct observation of the life cycle of individual cells within the human organism presents almost insurmountable difficulties. Nevertheless, if, reasoning purely by analogy, we surmise that cerebral cells must originate from entities akin to themselves, while simultaneously accepting as established that they do not undergo self-multiplication, we must presume that they develop from other cellular forms. The capacity for the regeneration, evolution, or transmutation of one cellular type into another is definitively established. For, ultimately, all cells within the organism derive from a single progenitor cell. The sole remaining question is, from which class of cells do cerebral cells evolve? To this, science can offer no reply. One can only surmise that if cells of a particular order metamorphose into cerebral cells, they thereby vanish from their prior plane of existence, depart the realm of their kindred, perish upon one level, and are reborn upon another, precisely as the ovum of a lepidopteran, in transforming into a caterpillar, perishes as an egg and ceases to be such. The caterpillar, in becoming a pupa, perishes as a caterpillar and ceases to be such. and the pupa, in emerging as a butterfly, perishes as a pupa, thereby departing the world of its own kind to ascend to a different plane of existence. In like manner, prospective cerebral cells, in transitioning to a higher plane of being, cease to be what they formerly were, perish to their previous state of existence, and commence life upon a novel plane. Upon this new plane, while remaining imperceptible and unacknowledged, they govern the activity of other cells, whether in their own interest or for the benefit of the entire organism. A portion of their function, moreover, consists in identifying within the more highly developed tissues those cells capable of evolving into cerebral cells, since the latter possess no capacity for self-replication. Thus, we observe within the human organism, in the relationship between cerebral cells and other cellular structures, an analogy to the relation between the inner circle and the outer circles of humanity. Prior to proceeding further, it is necessary to define with precision certain concepts that will be repeatedly encountered hereafter. The first of these is evolution. The concept of evolution has long occupied a preeminent position in Western thought. Indeed, to harbor doubts regarding evolution has long been viewed as the ultimate indication of intellectual retrogression. Evolution has been elevated to a species of universal key, purported to unlock all mysteries. This ubiquitous acceptance of an exceedingly hypothetical premise in itself engenders suspicion. The concept of evolution is of relatively recent origin. Darwin posited natural selection as empirical proof of evolution in its biological dimension. Yet, the popularization of evolution as a generalized doctrine is primarily attributable to Herbert Spencer, who was the first to interpret cosmic, biological, psychological, ethical, and sociological processes through the prism of a single, unifying principle. Nonetheless, isolated attempts to view the cosmic process as the product of mechanical evolution existed long prior to Spencer's synthesis. Astronomical philosophy on the one hand, and the biological sciences on the other, fashioned the contemporary concept of evolution, a concept now applied literally to every conceivable phenomenon, from societal structures to punctuation marks, based upon the a priori assumption that all things must evolve. Facts are carefully curated to substantiate this dogma. Whatever fails to align with the evolutionary paradigm is summarily discarded. According to standard lexicographical definitions, the term evolution denotes an orderly and progressive development governed by precise, yet ultimately obscure, laws. To comprehend this notion fully, one must observe that within the concept of evolution, what is excluded is of no less significance than what is encompassed. The doctrine of evolution, first and foremost, precludes the existence of a preordained plan or a guiding intelligence. It posits evolution as an autonomous and entirely mechanical process. Furthermore, it excludes fortuitous accident, that is, the intervention of novel factors into mechanical processes which would otherwise continually alter their trajectory. Under the evolutionary hypothesis, all developments progress inexorably in a single predetermined direction. One fortuitous event merely balances another. Moreover, the word evolution possesses no true antithesis, notwithstanding that processes such as dissolution and degeneration can by no means be categorized as evolutionary. The dogmatic significance ascribed to the term constitutes its most salient characteristic. Yet, this dogmatism is entirely devoid of foundation. On the contrary, there exists no concept more artificial or fragile than that of the universal evolution of all existence. The scientific foundations of evolution are nebular theories of the origin of worlds, with all additions, restrictions, and alterations, which in truth changed nothing of the primary misconception regarding the mechanical process of construction, and second, Darwin's theory of the origin of species, also with all subsequent additions and alterations. Yet such nebular hypotheses, regardless of the authorities associated with them, belong exclusively to the realm of pure speculation. Indeed, they constitute merely a classification of hypothetical phenomena which, through intellectual confusion and for lack of a superior alternative, has been elevated to the status of a theory of the cosmic process. As a theoretical framework, it lacks any foundation in empirical facts or observable laws. The evolution of organic forms, in the sense of the generation of novel species and classes across all the kingdoms of nature, is ostensibly supported by a vast array of scientific data drawn from comparative anatomy, morphology, embryology, paleontology, and allied fields. In reality, however, these facts have been artificially curated to substantiate the pre-existing theory. Each successive decade invalidates the empirical claims of the last, substituting new data in their stead, while the theory itself remains inviolable. At the very outset, when introducing the concept of evolution into biological thought, a highly conjectural assumption was made, for without it no coherent theory could have been constructed. Subsequently, it was forgotten that this was merely a postulate. I refer to the celebrated concept of the origin of species. The truth is that, if we adhere strictly to observable facts, we can admit evolution based on selection, adaptation, and elimination only in the sense of the preservation of existing species, for this alone is open to empirical observation. In reality, the emergence of entirely new species, their gradual formation, and their transition from lower to higher forms have never been observed in any instance. Evolution, in the sense of the transmutation of species, has never been more than a hypothesis, which attained the status of an established theory solely through a conceptual misunderstanding. The sole verifiable fact in this domain is the preservation of species. How they originally emerge remains entirely unknown, and we must not delude ourselves on this point. At this juncture, scientific discourse has, through a sleight of hand, substituted one proposition for another. That is to say, having demonstrated the diversification of varieties or domestic breeds, it has extrapolated this same evolutionary mechanism to species by means of a questionable analogy. This analogy is entirely illegitimate, and in characterizing this substitution as a sleight of hand, I do not exaggerate in the slightest degree. The evolution of varieties constitutes an established fact. However, these variations remain strictly within the boundaries of their respective species and exhibit profound instability, altering over several generations or reverting to their primordial type upon any modification of environmental conditions. A species represents a firmly established type, and, as previously observed, the transmutation of one species into another has never been witnessed. This, naturally, does not imply that every entity designated as a species constitutes a permanently fixed type. Rather, a species is firmly established only in comparison to a variety or breed, which represents a form undergoing modification almost perceptibly before us. Given the immense disparity between varieties and species, to attribute to the latter what has been demonstrated solely in relation to the former is, at the very least, a deliberate error. Yet, neither the magnitude of this intentional error nor its near-universal acceptance as truth obliges us to accommodate it, nor to presume some latent possibility underlying it. Furthermore, paleontological data, far from corroborating the concept of a systematic transition of species, utterly dismantle the notion of species itself as a fixed entity. Instead, they substantiate occurrences of saltations, retardations, reversions, and the abrupt manifestation of entirely novel forms, and so forth, which remain inexplicable from the standpoint of orderly evolution. Similarly, the evidence of comparative anatomy, to which proponents of evolution are highly predisposed to appeal, is beginning to challenge their assertions. For instance, it has proven entirely impossible to demonstrate any evolutionary progression in the case of discrete organs, such as the eye or the olfactory apparatus. To this must be added the observation that the concept of evolution, in its strictly scientific denotation, has already undergone significant modification. Consequently, a vast disparity now exists between the colloquial usage of the term in pseudoscientific essays and compendia and its genuine scientific significance. Science does not yet reject evolution. Nevertheless, the term itself is now acknowledged to be inadequate, and efforts are underway to identify an alternative descriptor that would convey a less artificial concept, one encompassing not only the process of integration but also that of dissolution. This latter concept becomes lucid when one recalls the previously noted fact that the term evolution possesses no direct antonym. The significance of this deficiency emerges with singular clarity when attempting to apply the term to social or political phenomena, wherein the consequences of degeneration or disintegration are repeatedly misconstrued as evolution. Moreover, evolution, which by definition cannot depend upon human volition, is perpetually conflated with the outcomes of intentional processes, which are likewise acknowledged as viable. In reality, the emergence of novel social or political structures depends neither upon human will nor upon evolution. In most instances, they represent merely an abortive, incomplete, and contradictory realization, or more accurately, a non-realization of theoretical programs underpinned by private interests. The conceptual confusion surrounding evolution stems largely from an awareness, which cannot be entirely erased from the human mind, that existence comprises not a solitary process, but a multiplicity of processes that intersect, disrupt one another, and introduce novel variables into one another's spheres. In broad terms, these processes may be divided into two primary categories: creative processes and destructive processes. Both categories are of equal import, for in the absence of destructive processes, creative processes could not occur. The former provide the very material required by the latter. Furthermore, all creative processes, without exception, eventually degenerate into destructive ones. Yet, this does not imply that the conjunction of creative and destructive processes constitutes what may be termed evolution. Western thought, in formulating the theory of evolution, has neglected these destructive processes. The cause of this omission lies within the artificially restricted intellectual horizon of recent centuries of European culture. Consequently, theories are constructed upon an inadequate body of evidence. No observed process is comprehended in its entirety, and, by examining merely a fragment of the whole, observers assert that the process consists of progressive change or evolution. It is remarkable that the modern mind is incapable of conceiving of the inverse process operating on a grand scale. To contemporary observers, destruction, degeneration, or dissolution occurring on a vast scale will inevitably appear to be progressive development or evolution. Notwithstanding these strictures, the term evolution can remain highly utility-bearing. When applied to empirically real phenomena, it assists in clarifying their substance and their intrinsic reliance upon other facts. For example, the development of all cellular structures of an organism from a single progenitor cell may be termed the evolution of that parent cell. The continuous differentiation of higher tissue cells from lower tissue cells may likewise be designated as cellular evolution. Strictly considered, all transformative processes may be characterized as evolutionary. The development of a chick from an egg, the growth of an oak from an acorn, the cultivation of wheat from a grain, and the metamorphosis of a butterfly from an egg through caterpillar and chrysalis states, all of these constitute instances of evolution as it genuinely manifests in the natural world. The concept of evolution in exoteric thought differs from that in esoteric doctrine in this crucial respect. Esoteric thought recognizes the potential for transformation or evolution where scientific inquiry perceives no such possibility. Specifically, esoteric thought acknowledges the potential for the transmutation of man into Superman, which represents the supreme significance of the term evolution. Aside from this definition, the term evolution may designate processes that promote the improvement of a strain and the preservation of a species, in contrast to those that degrade the strain and lead to its eventual degeneration. Returning to the concept of esotericism proper, it must be understood that in numerous ancient civilizations, Egypt and Greece, for instance, two distinct religions existed concurrently. One dogmatic and ceremonial, the other mystical and esoteric. The former comprised popular cults that preserved the half-forgotten forms of ancient mystical and esoteric mythology, whereas the latter constituted the religion of the mysteries. This latter tradition transcended popular worship by elucidating the allegorical and symbolic import of these myths, thereby uniting those who belonged to the esoteric circle or aspired to enter it. Comparatively little is known of the mysteries. Their role within ancient society and their contribution to the genesis of classical cultures remain entirely obscure to us. Yet, it is precisely the mysteries that resolve numerous historical enigmas, including, perhaps, the most profound of all, the sudden, brilliant emergence of Greek culture in the 7th century, succeeding the utter obscurity of the 8th and 9th centuries. In classical Greece, the mysteries were the domain of secret societies of a unique character. These clandestine fraternities of priests and initiates organized annual or periodic festivals, which were accompanied by allegorical theatrical performances. These theatrical productions, to which the term mysteries was specifically applied, were celebrated in various locales, the most renowned occurring at Delphi and Eleusis in Greece, and on the island of Philae in Egypt. The character of these theatrical performances and the allegorical dramas enacted there remained remarkably consistent. Both in Greece and in Egypt, the underlying theme remained identical: the death of the deity and his subsequent resurrection. This thematic thread ran continuously through all the mysteries. The significance may be interpreted in several ways. It is perhaps most accurate to conceive of the mysteries as representing the journey of the cosmos or the pilgrimage of the soul, its descent and birth into material form, its death and its subsequent resurrection, that is to say, its restoration to its primordial existence. Yet the dramatic representations, which to the populace constituted the entirety of the mysteries, were in truth of secondary import. Behind these spectacles existed schools, which comprised the very essence of the institution. The objective of these schools was the preparation of aspirants for initiation. Only those admitted into specific arcana were permitted to participate in the mysteries. Initiation was accompanied by elaborate rites, some of public character, and by diverse trials that the candidate was obliged to undergo. For the multitude, these outward ceremonies constituted the entirety of initiation. Yet, in reality, these rites were merely exoteric observances. The genuine trials occurred not in the moments immediately preceding formal admission, but throughout an extensive and occasionally protracted course of study and preparation. Furthermore, initiation was by no means an instantaneous miracle. Rather, it represented a systematic and gradual induction into a novel cycle of thought and feeling, akin to initiation into any rigorous science or discipline of knowledge. Several hypotheses exist regarding the prevailing conceptions of the era concerning the benefits or powers that initiation bestowed. Among these hypotheses was the belief that initiation conferred immortality. The Greeks, as well as the Egyptians, harbored a remarkably somber conception of existence beyond the grave, as exemplified by the Homeric Hades or the traditional Egyptian visions of the afterlife. Initiation offered liberation from this gloom, providing an avenue of escape from the perpetual anguish of the underworld and imparting a form of vital existence even in death. This concept is expressed with unparalleled clarity in the Easter hymn of the Orthodox Church, a liturgy that undoubtedly originates from remote pre-Christian antiquity, thereby linking the Christian doctrine to the ideology of the mysteries. Christ is risen from the dead. He has conquered death by death, and given life to those within the tombs. A remarkable analogy exists between the substance of the mysteries and the earthly ministry of Christ. The life of Christ, as recounted in the Gospels, represents the selfsame mystery as those enacted in Egypt on the island of Philae, in Greece at Eleusis and elsewhere. The underlying concept remained identical: the death of the deity and his subsequent resurrection. The sole distinction between the mysteries enacted in Egypt and Greece and the drama performed in Palestine lies in the fact that the latter was realized in actual life, not upon a stage, but amidst the raw elements of nature, in the streets and public squares of real cities, against a genuine landscape of sky, mountains, lakes, and trees, before an actual multitude, driven by genuine passions of love, malice, and hatred, and consummated with real nails and authentic suffering. All the participants in this drama were conscious of their roles, performing them in strict alignment with an overarching design and the ultimate purpose of the play. Within this drama, nothing was spontaneous, unconscious, or accidental. Each actor knew precisely which words to utter and at what juncture. Indeed, he delivered precisely what was ordained, in the exact manner prescribed. This was a drama destined to have the entire world as its audience for centuries and millennia. Moreover, the drama was executed without the slightest error or inaccuracy, in perfect conformity with the author's design and the director's plan. For, in accordance with the tenets of esotericism, both an author and a director must assuredly have existed. Note: I discovered a certain correspondence with this thesis in John M. Robertson's book, Pagan Christs. The author approaches closely the concept of the drama of Christ as a theatrical performance akin to the mysteries. Indeed, the initial impression conveyed by his chapter is that he posits precisely what has been outlined above. In reality, however, the correspondence is incomplete, though exceedingly curious. Through a comparative study of the ancient mysteries and the gospel narratives, the author of Pagan Christs concluded that the Gospels do not record historical events, but rather delineate a play staged for a specific purpose. A production conceptually allied with ancient mysteries, yet structurally analogous to the later medieval mystery plays. He synthesizes the concepts of ancient and medieval mysteries, the latter consisting of episodes from the life of Christ, asserting that the legend of the historical Christ was predicated upon just such a mystery play, structured in 5 acts. The Last Supper, the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Passion, the Trial, and the Crucifixion, to which the resurrection was subsequently appended. This play, performed in obscure times and places, was ultimately transcribed in the Gospels as an actual historical event transpiring in Jerusalem. The core concept and objective of the mysteries remained as concealed as the very substance of initiation. To those cognizant of the existence, do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.